And look, listen, I've been keeping you here forever. I just want to real quick. I want to ask you last thing about because we were talking about the Passover, and we're talking about historical Jesus.
Yeah.
A lot of Christians think that this Talmud is talking about Jesus of Nazareth being hung on Passover for leading Israel astray. His mother's name's Mary. What is the deal with this? Is this the real Jesus? Is this some other Jesus? What is this?
So we have a character in the Talmud that comes up quite a. Talmud is the largest document of the ancient world and records the sayings and teachings of people like Rabbi Gamliel, who's in the Christian Bible. Fakely, we're told in Acts that he was a teacher of Paul, which is nonsense. Forget all that, okay? But this is like the Mishnah Talmud is really, really important, very important Jewish literature. Now, we have a figure named Jesus. And you go, well, Jesus, that's got to be Yeshu. Well, that's got to be Jesus. Like, how many Jesus do you know? All right, so he's the first baseman for the Red Sox. Forget that Jesus. I'm just saying that as it turns out, the name Yeshu or Yeshua was just the equivalent of Josh. It was a truncated Joshua. Okay, that's all it was, Josh. Okay, and we have not one but many events in the Talmud which talks about him, and he is not described in a charitable way. He's not described, he doesn't come off well at all. His mother is described as an adulteress who had a baby, this is big, okay, with a Roman soldier named Pantera, and out comes this guy, Yeshu, who leads the Jewish people astray. He brings idolatry from Egypt. Egypt was like, I mean, it's not like an accident that the word Trinity was invented in Africa, was invented in Carthage. I mean, can anything good come out of Alexandria? I mean, the doctrine of the Trinity. All right, so what happens is you have this figure in the Talmud who's coming up, who's not coming up favorably. Now, here's the caveat, and you got to listen very. So there's got to be a full disclosure. For some reason, this Jesus figure, this Yeshu figure in the Talmud, is dated to either a person who lived in the 1st century BCE or in the 2nd century. Okay? So this is very important. You have to listen very carefully. And in fact, when Jews were put on trial for having a Talmud that said blasphemy against Jesus and Mary, this would make the church a little uncomfortable. And of course, the church had a thing for not writing anything that's unflattering of Christianity. The defense that the Jews used was that these references to Jesus is not your Jesus. It's not the Yeshu of Christianity, but there's one, for instance, in the Talmud in Sanhedrin, that he lived during the time of Rabbi Shua ben Parachia. I don't expect anyone to memorize that, but just believe me, he lived about 100 in the 1st century BCE. Okay. By the way, mythicists appeal to this. Mythicists, some, not all, but many mythicists appeal to this and say, the Jesus really never existed, and they were just taking someone from the Talmud from who was a century earlier. That's just. Don't let that confuse you. Stay with me. You've got these really uncomplimentary things about this Yeshu person, but he's 1st century BCE, or he's in the 2nd century, which means he would be a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva. So he's not the Jesus of Christianity. That is one view, and it's a big view. Chiefly, it was the view that was used in the defense of the Talmud in France in 1242, when the Talmud was put on trial. By the way, it didn't win. And, every Talmud was burnt in front, where the Louvre is today. Every Talmud, 500,000 manuscripts were burnt by the church. St. Louis IX, that filthy dog, is a horrible anti-Semite. Anyways, well, I don't want to get into all this stuff. So the Talmud was put on trial, but this was the defense, the chief defense that the Jews, like, for a Jew to live in Spain in the 13th century, that's like living in North Korea. Okay, so it's Kim Jong-un. So, like, I don't know what someone would say if they were thrown in jail in North Korea, but, whatever. So the consensus, I don't want to use the word consensus, it's a very strong word. So there are two views on this. One view is that the Jesus mentioned in the Talmud is a different Jesus. And that was, in fact, the defense that the Jews used, so Jews don't get killed. The other view, which is probably the consensus, definitely in the non-Jewish world, is that this is all about the Jews of Christianity, and the Jews were facing death by church, and therefore the Jews had to alter their own Talmud, and we actually collected every text and said, hey, everybody, we have to change these texts. We're going to put those texts somewhere else so you can find them. It's like the book of the missing texts, which we still have to this day. And because we just don't want people to die. So just like people who saved Jews from the Nazis had to lie to the Nazis, like Corrie ten Boom, so they did that in order to protect us. So the Jews took the character Jesus, who really is the Jesus of the first century, and then shoved him to the first century BCE and the second century, not for any theological reason, just to make sure that Jewish communities would not be killed by the church. It did not work very well, I should say. It was not, I mean, the church didn't buy it, and many Jews
how
are
could there
murdered.
be two Jesus of Nazareth, both being killed for leading Israel astray, and both have a mother named Mary?
It gets more. Do you want more, or do you want me to go? You want me to give you something? But every other show is going to be jealous that I'm giving you this hot stuff.
$50 for this one.
Okay, I want you to listen very carefully. This is hot. This is pure heat. As it turns out, is it a coincidence that if the Jesus of the Talmud is the Jesus of Christianity, then Jesus, according to this version, was conceived through adultery and did not have a human Jewish father, because his actual biological father was a Roman soldier. Okay. By the way, Roman soldiers were everywhere in the first century, because the state of Israel was a vassal state of Rome from Pompeii. Okay, so get it. So this is not like, well, where'd you find an Italian? They're everywhere. Okay, got it. And then the church claims that Jesus was born to a virgin. Is that a coincidence that both the church and the Jewish tradition, this is really strong, big sources on this. This is not just legend, this is big. This is like huge. So you have these just two versions, but both of them agree that Jesus wasn't born to a Jewish woman and a Jewish father. I mean, is it an accident that when Paul refers to Jesus, he calls him the born to a woman according to the law? Like, what about a mommy and a daddy? Maybe, but it gets even more heated than this. You could say chalk this up to a complete coincidence, or we can get hotter. Could it be that the Joseph character, being Joseph, the husband of Mary, who had nothing to do with the conception of Jesus, according to Matthew and Luke, was a later invention to cover this? They go, oh, Rabbi Singer, don't engage in conspiracy stuff. You better have to back it up. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Okay. If this were true, that Joseph, the husband of Mary, was a later invention, what, and I'm going to ask you this question because we didn't do this before, what would you expect to find in the text of the Christian Bible? Early text versus later text in the canon. Would you expect to find Joseph in the early text or only in the later text? So I want your viewers to get this. If Joseph is an invention in order to cover for an unflattering conception, and then you have your plot device for both Matthew and Luke. They're very different, but in this, by the same, this is what you'd expect. See, this is the way you do real theological math. You don't play games, you don't go believe me, and you notice something I do. I never quote scholars. I say, let's go to the original text. I mean, I quoted Franz Delitzsch because it was like so amazing, but I don't quote scholars. Do it for yourself. Where do we find Joseph, the husband of Mary? Is he mentioned in the letters of Paul? None of them. And he hung out for 2 weeks in Jerusalem and no one told him, so nowhere he's mentioned. What's the earliest gospel? The earliest gospel is the book of what? Mark. Is Joseph mentioned in the book of Mark? No. Never. Who is the carpenter in Mark? It's not Joseph, it's Jesus, Mark chapter 6, verse 3. Our only source in the entire Christian Bible that Jesus was a carpenter is Mark. And Joseph is never mentioned because they never thought of Joseph yet. I know it's crazy.
Wait a second. Hold on a second.
I
Let's
know.
play this out.
I told you
Paul
this
was
is
written
big.
in the 50s and 60s, maybe not, maybe 60s.
Right, he's not in Hebrews. Like
So,
Hebrews
so
is written
Paul
like
doesn't.
64, 65.
So yeah. So if Paul's first, he's not mentioning any Joseph character.
Nothing.
He's
And he
then
might have
you
because
get
it would come
Mark.
up in context.
Then you get
And
Mark.
Galatians
No
4:4, he
Joseph.
mentions born to a woman. Like
Right. Then you get Joseph, no, or Mark, no Joseph. And
nothing.
then all of a sudden, when is Matthew written?
80, 85. Like,
Then
look,
all of a sudden, Joseph appears.
bingo. Exactly.
What?
I
This is
told you. I
crazy.
told you. I
This is
told you.
crazy.
I told you that you're not gonna ask for a refund on the show. But what I want to do is, I know we're all used to conspiracy theories. I'm not. I'm a rabbi. Let me be clear. People come to me and they want to make really important decisions. Okay. I'm not just there like selling books, whatever. People are coming to me for and they need to see things black and white. Like, it's not like I think it's similar to that. And there's this ancient, no, 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 no. Let's get tight. Let's go in the text itself. And in fact, as it turns out, it's in Matthew. Then we're told about Joseph, Joseph is the carpenter in Matthew, not in Mark. You see, in Mark, it's Jesus who's the carpenter. In Matthew, it's Joseph is the carpenter. And as it turns out, Joseph is mentioned in John in the last book. That means the most highly um, modified, embellished of all the four Gospels, obviously the book of John. And there you want to get ready for this? There's like a deep breath. In the book of John, only Joseph, the father of Jesus, is mentioned. The the alleged father of Jesus is mentioned, and Mary is never mentioned. Mary, the mother of Jesus, never mentioned by name in the book of John. Never. Not once. She is referred to as the mother of Jesus in an unflattering way at the wedding in Cana, but he just says, "Mother, what I have to do?" She's never called Mary. John, she's put down. Why? Because John has the logos. John wants Jesus to be semi-divine. If Jesus semi-divine, she's awkward. Like, I don't need a mother's womb for this. He comes from the eternal past. Yes, sir.
Just thought of something. So you get Joseph. First of all, I didn't even know that Joseph's not mentioned in Mark. That just blew my mind. But
Right.
second of all, now that you just mentioned that to me, the other two gospels before John, Matthew and Luke, have a genealogy in them trying to connect Jesus to David and all the other prophets, like Abraham and whatever.
Right.
Those genealogies are not Mary. They have Joseph in the
Right.
genealogy, which means
They're not relevant.
they need Joseph to make him a Davidic bloodline.
Right.
What? This lines up with what you're saying.
That's right. And so what you do, this is the way you do real research, is you don't start with an idea and then try to manufacture the evidence. What you do is go, okay, if the Joseph person is mythical and he's covering for something, and we have this huge, again, this is the Talmud, this is very serious literature. So you have to think to yourself, what do we then expect to find in the text? And then you can then trace. We know Paul is the earliest surviving Christian literature. We know John is the last gospel chronologically of the New Testament. We know that. I mean, this is not disputed. So what you would expect to find is what we find from First Thessalonians to Mark. No mention of Joseph. Nothing. And then, as we'd expect to find Joseph all over the place afterwards. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. It's unlikely. There you go, my friends.
And here's another thing I want to point out real quick, and then we can
Yeah.
finish off. Because people are going to say, well, the Talmud is written in 300 AD. But if you read the Talmud, which I have read a lot of it, the sources in the Talmud they're talking about events that happened in the first century, like a meeting between Vespasian and the high priest Yohanan, in depth with detail, as if they're.
So this is non-controversial. Look, everything we've talked about. I didn't look it up. I have chapters in my books. I'm really not trying to sell books, but I have whole chapters dedicated to Septuagint. If you go pick the encyclopedia of these are not religious people who do these encyclopedias. You look up Septuagint. There's nothing I'm saying that's weird. You're not listening to the rantings of a a non-Christian rabbi. This is everything I'm telling you is just mainstream right there. Okay, it's just very, very simple stuff. There's no conspiracy here. I'm not saying it sounds a lot like that. It's not that. It's just the same thing with the doctrine of the Trinity. We would expect in the earliest gospel, Mark, to find an adoptionist theology, and we would expect to find in in a theology like we find in John with the Logos, where we find our highest Christology. And then later on, we have Ignatius saying that Jesus, claiming Jesus is God. And then we have the doctrine of the Trinity hammered out in Nicaea. I mean, you could just trace this. This is not a conspiracy thing. This is not like this sounds like that. You just can apply the math, and it's just a simple equation. This is math. This is what equals y. This is what equals x, and bingo, you put in the numbers, and it comes out perfectly. And there you go.
And this is why I wanted to have you on, because I've been watching your videos, you and Derek talking, and hearing your claims when I was a Christian. This is when I first discovered you, when I was a Christian. Hearing the claims that you would make would be like, if he's right, everything I'm believing in is false. And so what I would do is, instead of running to the pastor and trying to get some biased response, I actually would go to the text, even learn a little bit of Hebrew if I had to, and look at what you're saying, and it all checked out. I have yet to find anything you said to be
Right. And that's what we did tonight. If you notice, I don't, well, we've never done a show together, and, nothing disparaging, but scholars like to quote other scholars, whatever, great scholars, Albert Schweitzer, genius, right? One thing you'll notice is I never quote scholars because I want the viewers to go to the original text. Stop relying on people. The primary text, the actual texts are there, accessible. We have it. We have all the text. You can go right back to it, like we did this tonight. Go back to the original text. I didn't say in his Bultmann. I don't forget that. I'm not saying it's not valuable, but we have access to more information today than we ever did in human history. Why not just? There's a lot at stake here. As you said, if Christianity is false, it's not like Buddhism. If you're Buddhist, don't be offended. Like, oh, I guess some guy sat and thought it was a bad idea to go to war. This is not Buddhism where a guy just sat and thought for a while and came up with this stuff. And maybe they're wrong, and maybe Krishna is not a deity, and they thought he was, but it was an honest mistake of some people who were just, spending too much time eating vegetation, whatever, not in a protein, whatever. I imagine it was well-meaning people that just whatever. But this stuff is a scam. This is the kind of stuff that gets you thrown in prison. And this is why the church hates the Jews in its literature, because they have to portray the Jews as devils, John 8:44. Because if we're not devils, that means we must be telling the truth. The Jews, everyone knows, clever people. We have that reputation, always did. It's our Bible. Only we can read it. Only we're waiting for the Messiah. Either the Jews are the worst people in the world or the best people. And I will submit this. In truth, and I'll end with this, I would challenge people, pick any city you want in North America, Europe, and ask somebody, what do you think of the Jews? London, Brussels, it doesn't make a difference. Cologne, go. The only rule is that the person has to say the truth. Okay? What do you think you're going to hear from people in Rome, in Athens, if they have to tell the truth? I assure you, now, if you ask them without that caveat, they go, oh, I think the Jews are fine, and they're just like everybody else, right? But that's not what they really think. People have very, very strong views of Jewish people. And we're a really tiny people. They either love us or hate us. We're a highly polarizing people. For example, if I asked people on the streets of New York, San Francisco, Miami, Chicago, London, Manchester, what do you think of the Koreans, the South Koreans? What do you think of the Chinese? Chinese, that's the most successful race in the world. People really don't have strong views about the Chinese people. Great food. They work hard. I don't know, whatever. People have what do you think of the Japanese? I don't know. Toyota's a great, people just don't have strong views about the Japanese. But the Jews, it's either hate them or love them. Now, everyone's going to tell you they don't have an opinion, like they never formed an opinion about Jews. But it's obviously not true. People have very strong views about the Jews. And this really is Christian, because either the Jews are bringing the world truth and telling them, do not follow the church, or we are the devils themselves who are smart like Satan, and we are trying to cover your eyes because our eyes have been covered with a veil in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. That's what it all comes down to. Now, what I encourage you to do is go back to the original text.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא